Morning, everyone. So our job today is we're going to be reassembling that Honda that came in with the broken timing belt and it bent the exhaust valves and stuff like that. I have the head here on my little bench, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be replacing all the valve stem seals. I'm going to be replacing the exhaust valves, lapping them in place. I'm going to show you step by step how to go through that. Let me show you real quick what I've done so far. And here it is. Here's that Honda. Here's my valve stem seals. Here's my valve stem seal installer. Actually, it's a protector. This actually goes over the valve like that, and then you slide the seal over top of it. And the reason for this is the valve itself has notches in it. Has cuts in there for the locks or keepers to keep it in place. Now, what you need to do is you need to strike, before you even start doing these things, you strike the top of these with a plastic hammer. Like this, just a quick little strike. I like to put a socket over top of it like that and hold it securely like such. Then strike the top of that with a hammer. Reason being is I've had it happen a couple of times, and it happened on this one. As you see on this one, right there, the lock or keeper actually came dislodged. When I got to this one, I hit it a little too hard and it actually flew apart. Luckily, I found everything I needed to go back together. I've seen somebody do that where they struck it with a hammer and the locks came flying out and they couldn't find them because they went, into the abyss known as the floor in the shop, and it happens. So now the reason for striking the retainer on the valve, lightly, like giving it a light tap, is you want to break free the retainer from the locks or keepers, whatever you want to refer to them as, and then that just breaks it free, because if you try to compress it, sometimes it gets so stuck in place you can't compress it, but the quick strike will actually make it so it releases itself. Now, what happened yesterday, I started making this video yesterday, and what happened was I went and I started to do the valve stem seals on the intake side. So then I went to go lap the valves in place, and guess what I discovered? I actually had bent intake valves as well, but they were still holding pressure. Probably because of the pressure of the valve spring was just enough to straighten the valve out, because these got tiny stems on them. So let me show you what happened. Now what I did do is I already changed all of the intake valves. All of the exhaust valves, and now I'm onto the intake valves. So now here is one of the exhaust valves, and it's clear cut. You could see how bent that is. Let me see if I can focus in on that. And you can see what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick it in a drill when I'm done, and I'm going to show you how bent they are. But I found, because I went to go lap the intake valves in place, and I found that, I started to lap the intake valves in place, and I found that they weren't fully seating. So let me see, where is that valve? Oh, it's right here. So if you look, you could see, some of you know what you're looking at, some of you don't. But that edge there, you see how it's like a gray color? Right there, that's where the lapping compound was making contact. And if you come around, all of a sudden here you have an area where it's not making contact. All throughout that. Basically what that means is the valve itself is bent, so it's only creating a seal on that side where it lapped in place. I'll explain a little more as we go along here. But what I did was, like I said, I already assembled all the exhaust valves. They're all new valves. And I assembled the intake. I was only able to get 6 out of the 8. I only had 4 that were just slightly bent. The other 4 were fine. I wanted to do all 8 since I was in there, but since I could only get 6, we're doing 6. So where we start with this is you got to pull the valve stem seals off. Now I already pried on these to get them loose because they're kind of like dried up and stuck in place. So we're going to get that off of there. Then we're going to take a rag and we're going to clean that off. Now, what you got to remember too, when dealing with something like this and you're cleaning it, since we're lapping the valves in place with lapping compound, you want to make sure you don't reuse rags. So what I do is I just take them, throw them on the floor, because they work great for cleaning up spills that wind up on the floor. So let me go on to the next step here. All right, so like I said, I had some bent valves, but I had some good valves, and I could only get 6 intakes. So I got two of the best valves that I had lapped in place right there on whatever that is. That's cylinder number 2. So back over here to cylinder number 4, here's 2 new valves. So I'm going to show you how I lap them in place. Now I know some of you are going to say, oh no, I do it this way, I do it that way. Okay, that's fine. I have no problem with that. This is the way I do it. And this is the way I've done it for many, many years, and I never have an issue. So let me show you what I do. Oh, and also real quick, I got this handy little tripod stand thing to hold my phone. I got that from Kate Bartholomew. Thank you so much. And I'm going to try using that when I get a little further into this. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of lapping compound and put on here. Those of you that don't know what that is, valve grinding compound is what it's also known as. And it's a paste that you put right down on the edge here all the way around. I'm going to show you that in a second. And it's got very fine metal, very fine grinding compound in it, like like grinding stone material, pumice, whatever you want to call it. And what that does is it helps grind the seat there. You can see the surface where the original valve was sitting. It helps mate that surface there to that surface there, so you get a good seal. All right, so now I got the handy little device that I got from Kate hooked up, and what I did is I had technical difficulties there. I have one valve already set in place. What I did was I actually took this lapping compound and I did this. Basically, I coated the valve seat like that. And I'm just going to put this one down because this is going to be the next one in there. Now what I have is I have my drill with a vacuum hose on the end of it. And what I do is I take the valve, once it's in place and going through, I take the drill and I actually stick the vacuum hose over the end to lock it in place. So now, let me do that over here. Now let me move this so I can see what I'm talking about. Just like that. And now I'm going to spin it in place. Now if you listen closely, you'll hear it grinding in place. And if you just hold it, it kind of stops doing it. So that's the reason for me going in and out, because what happens is it allows that compound to fall back onto the seat, so you keep grinding it in place. Just like that. So now, take this off of here, and I'm going to knock the valve back out. Let me move this. So now we drop this back out, and I'm going to clean this. So let me pause this. Now I wiped all the compound off of that, and if you look closely at the valve, you'll see it's got a nice gray finish to it right there. If I can focus in on that. It's got a nice gray finish right there. And that's what you want to see. You want to see it nice and even. Like I said, that valve that was bent, if you look real closely at it, you'll see it missed that whole entire area right there. But there is nice and gray, and there you see where it went back to the old finish. So this valve is bent. So that one valve is done, and I have to remember that this one valve goes into that one hole there. So I'm going to remember that. And now I'm going to do the other one. I'm going to put the other one in place. I'm not going to show you that whole thing because I just showed you that one. And then when we're done, we're going to clean all that compound off, because that compound, you don't want to leave it in there. That compound has very fine grit in it. Get that grit in the motor, you're going to destroy bearings, you're going to destroy all sorts of stuff. You're going to be done. So let me just pause this again. All right, so now this one is done. This one's looking good. And what we're going to do is we're going to clean out where the compound was. What I'm going to wind up doing is just wiping it out for right this second, but then I'm going to flush it out with brake clean. Just get all that stuff out of there. And now, let me take my phone out of this. if you look close, you can see how nice and gray that area looks where the valve is seating. That's perfect. You may be able to see the glitter too from the grit that's in the compound there. If you want to destroy a motor, like I said, make sure you get this in there. It will destroy a motor. So now it's time for the assembly. Alright, so now that the valves are out, here's the valve stem seals. They're going to go on, and they actually, you push them down. Now you heard that little pop because there's a groove on there, and you can see the rib on the inside of that actually snaps into the little groove on there. And it all cleaned out. So back in place, and there. That one wasn't as pronounced, but it's in place. So now I take the valve, and again I'm just going to put a touch of oil on the tip there. I'm going to stick that back up in place like that. And now they give you an installation tool for this, so it's to help protect this. You don't nick the seal, but that's usually done when the valve is still sitting in place because the tool won't fit through the guide hole. So anyway, that's all in place now. Now it's time to install the spring. So now we grab the spring, lay it in place like so. I got my spring compressor, and this is a cheapie, and I really am not crazy about this thing, but it's the only thing I got. You compress it enough to get the valve and that groove in the valve to stick out so you can get the keepers in place, or locks, whatever you want to refer to them as. These little pieces here, and you see they have, oops, kind of hard to see, but you'll see on there's a rib that sticks out right towards this finger there, and that actually grabs inside there and holds in place. And you can see these are tapered. They got a thin end. Oops. You have a thin end. You have a thick end. So the thin end goes down because it's a taper. What I usually do is I take a very tiny screwdriver like that, pocket screwdriver. I put tranny assembly gel. You can use grease if you want, and it works fine too. And I usually put it right to the inside of this because it'll help hold it in place. Then I put some to the outside to hold it like that with the taper facing down. Now I get it in place like so, and then I got to get it to sit just down far enough to get it to catch in that groove. Now that little bit of grease, or like I'm using the tranny assembly gel, it'll help hold it in place so it doesn't fall. Let me do the next one. Same thing. These can be a little tricky, getting the right spot. Sometimes you gotta move the spring too. Oops. Yeah, this one's gonna fight me a little bit. Maybe that's in place. Yep, it's in place. So now, what I always do is I clean the assembly gel out that's in there, like so, because I want to be able to see in there. And I want to see that the keepers or locks are sitting in place like that. So now I'm going to do the last one. I'm not going to film that. And then we're ready for the wipe down, and then this thing's going to go back on the car. Alright, so we're ready to go back together now. Everything's cleaned up. Gasket surfaces are all cleaned. Started to reassemble that. I got the gasket for the intake in place because I left the intake in the car. Everything's cleaned up here. Now these block dowels, they come right out, so make sure that you put them back in place because it centers your gasket. Also, You want to take compressed air into each one of the head bolt holes and blow them out. Make sure there's no debris, no dirt inside there. If you get anything out of them, you know, like oil, coolant, or whatever, and actually, a lot of times whenever I stick the blower in there like this, what I'll do is I will take a rag and hold it over top of it like that, because what happens is you spray air in there and it's got coolant or whatever, it's going to spray up and, you know, get up all over the place. So do that just to be a little safe. So now we're pretty much ready to drop the head gasket in place. And here we go. The head gasket goes in place like such. Up. Look at your head gaskets. Look at any gaskets, because sometimes the gaskets will say manifold side or up or, you know, left side, something like that. It'll say it somewhere on there. Just make sure you put it in the right position. And verify your bolt holes too, because you never know. You could have gotten the wrong gasket. Verify everything's lining up like it should. So now we're going to get ready to drop the head in place. I'm not going to go through everything in regards to that. I'm going to drop the head on. I'm going to get the head bolts in. I'm going to start bolting everything up. I'm not going to walk you through everything on that. It's just going to be time consuming. I don't want to do that. Alright, so the head is on and it's torqued. Now the next step is I'm going to bolt the intake up, and then I'm going to put the cam in. Now you got to remember, when you're putting a cam in or anything that rotates or anything that moves, you know, rockers too, you got to oil the stuff up. So you got to get some clean oil. You got to put it on all the journals. And even on the tips of the valves, even though I got that tranny gel residue on there, still you want to put some oil on there. This way you have it. And then we're going to go from there. Let me get the intake bolted up. All right, so the head is torqued and the rocker shafts is on with all the rocker arms and whatnot. I didn't film that portion of it because this has VTEC, and those are the VTEC rockers. And they fell apart when I had this thing apart. I've neglected on these. You're supposed to leave the N2 cam cap bolts in place on each side, and I didn't do that. And what happened was the spring load in here pushed everything apart, and the latching mechanism that's down inside here blew apart. So there was a lot of cursing going on because I made the mistake and I just was very aggravated. So I got it all back together. Everything's fine. I found all the pieces. Luckily, everything fell apart into the into my work tray there. But anyway, that's all on. It's torqued. There's a tiny bead of silicone on each end cap in there to prevent leakage. Now, what I'm going to do is, because the engine's on number 1, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rotate it, and I'm going to get all the pistons down to the halfway point. Because right now, cylinder 1 and cylinder 4, the pistons are at top dead center. Can't even speak English. Top dead center. Cylinders 2 and 3 are at bottom dead center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the motor over, and I'm going to get all the pistons about halfway. This way, I can rotate the cam and not have to worry about opening the valves and hitting the pistons again. So I can rotate them, because I got to adjust all these valves and get them to where they need to be. Now you may be wondering how I figure out when they're all about center of their stroke. And it's pretty easy. I don't know if you're going to be able to see in there, but you can actually see the top of the piston on that one. On that one, it's just an open hole, basically, because the piston's all the way at the bottom. Easy way to do this. Take a long 1/4-inch drive extension, make sure there's no scrap junk on it, nothing like that. Drop it in a hole. There, that's all the way at top dead center. This is touching the top of the piston. If I go into the next one, it actually goes down and starts hitting the side, the bore, the skirt. Wow, I can't even speak English today. It hits the cylinder bore. So you see how far down that went, as opposed to this one. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it over and get it to where they're all about halfway. Alright, so now I just rotated it. I'm going to stick that down in there. I'm just going to use my hand to measure it. So that. Perfect. So now I can go ahead and adjust the valves. Okay, so now I'm going to adjust the valves. Okay, so these are the exhaust rockers right here. for cylinder number 1. These are the intake back here, cylinder number 1. Now what I did is the cam is on number 1 for the motor, as if the motor was in time, which it's not. And what basically the lobes are on the opposite end of where they need to be. So now I can actually adjust all 4 of these. So I already cracked the lock nut free, and what you do is the adjustment is 10 thousandths on the intake and 12 thousandths on the exhaust. So here I have, where the heck is, oh, it's in my hand. Duh. So here I have, can you see that? Right there. Okay. It's a feeler gauge. This is a 12 thousandths. And basically you wind up sticking it in here in between the tip of the valve and the rocker. As you see, I can't even get it in there. Now these are all new valves, so everything has to be adjusted. Take a screwdriver, loosen up, and there you go. Gotta get that in place. Now you're gonna screw this down, and as soon as you start to feel resistance, you drag the screwdriver, the feeler gauge through it. This video is not going the way I was hoping it would. There it goes. So there, it slides in there nice and easy. And I mean, I could go tighter, but like you want to feel it come to a stop, and you just do it very light and easy. Okay, so now I know it's good right there. Now, what I always do is when I go to tighten it back up, put the wrench on it, hold the set screw in the right spot, and then tighten. The reason you hold the screwdriver in there is because when you go to tighten this, the set screw can actually start to move because it's not touching anything. It has some play to it, so there's no resistance to it, so it'll spin pretty easy. So that's basically the way you do it. Now I'm going to do all the valves. What I have to do is, like some of these, like these are tight here, these are loose, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I rotate the cam appropriately to get the lobes on the opposite direction so the rocker arms aren't being pushed. And like I said, I have no problem doing that now because the pistons are halfway down in their bore, so I don't have to worry about smacking the valves into the pistons. Alright, so I got the timing belts on. I got the crank pulley on, stuff like that. The reason I didn't film that is I ran out of time here. I got aggravated too because it seemed like everything I touched I had to do twice. I forgot to put the rear cover in place. You can see the lower half of it in here. I forgot to put that in place, and I wound up having to take it back apart when I realized that it wasn't there. So anyway, yeah, yesterday I ran out of time. I was here till almost 9 o'clock getting this thing to this point, and I had to give up on it then. So there I got that on. The intake's all bolted up. Rock arms are on, they're adjusted. The exhaust manifold is on. I still got to put the lower pipe in place. Not that it matters, because I still got to fix the cat. Put the upper hose in place, and just continue from there. The valve cover, as you see here, I cleaned it out. I got the new tube seals in place for the spark plugs, new valve cover gaskets in place. This goes on last after the top timing cover because there's a receiver groove in the valve cover that fits over that. Now I'm going to put this in place, and you can actually see witness marks here from silicone because I had started to put silicone on it when I realized you got to put the front cover on first, and then that's when I realized I forgot to put the rear of the front cover in place. So yeah, I was just getting a little aggravated at myself yesterday. So let's get on with that. All right, so there you see now I got all of that stuff assembled. I got the brackets in place. I got the valve cover. I got the exhaust shield in place. Now I'm going to put the distributor in. This one's got a distributor. If you look inside, the cam drives the distributor, and that's actually slightly offset. So what I'm going to do is go to the distributor. I'm going to set it up with the offset on that facing forward, and then it's aimed at the top hole. You see that? So now take this, it should go right in. Yeah, see, there it is. Now, oops, there it is. So it's right in place. If that was off, let's just rotate that 180 for you to see. If that was off, it would not go in. I don't know how much you messed with it. Being like that. exactly 180. See, it just will not go in. So now, rotate that, 180, and it's facing the top bolt hole, and there it goes right in. So now we're going to put the bolts in, and this is adjustable timing on this, so we're going to have to set the timing and all said and done. But for now, I'm going to put everything right up to the witness marks and go from there. All right, so I got everything buttoned up as far as I want to go to get this thing running, and just so you see, I got like the alternator sitting in place. The reason I even put the alternator in place is because of the wiring. I just didn't want to leave the wiring hanging out, because otherwise, if the wiring was in a good spot, I wouldn't have been worried about it. But like it dangles all over the place, it's like, may as well just stick the alternator back in. As you can see, the power steering isn't in yet. The hoses are on, the ignition wires are on. I had to replace the ignition wires because one broke coming apart. You can see in the corner where the valve cover meets the hump for the cam cap. That's part of the holder for the distributor. Wherever you have a corner on a valve cover gasket or something like that, you want to put silicone on there, some kind of a sealer to squish out, because what's going to happen is you'll wind up with a leak otherwise. So I have everything in place. Everything looks good. I double checked underneath just to make sure. I got the battery hooked up. There is no coolant in this yet, because I have found over time that every time I add coolant first before verifying that the car will run, I inevitably wind up with a problem where I have to take something apart, and it usually involves coolant, and then I got to drain the thing again. So at least this way I could start it and run it for a minute, and just to verify that everything sounds good. So let's go. All right. Now don't forget, I still got to fix the exhaust. So you're going to have the battery light on, of course, because there's no alternator. Got an ABS light on, not exactly sure why. May have been on from before, I don't know. The brake light is on because I got the parking brake on. That's it. This actually sounds smooth, so I'm happy with that. I mean, that thing fired right off. I don't know if you paid attention to that. It fired right off, so that's a good sign. But it's nice and smooth. The car's not shaking. Sounds good. The exhaust sounds smooth, even though it's loud, but that's good. So I am happy with that. So now I'm going to put the power steering on. I'm going to bleed that out. I'm going to fill the cooling system. I'm going to verify everything with that. There's one bracket I got to put on underneath. I'm going to fix the exhaust. And then I'm going to change the oil after I have it running for a few minutes. Make sure everything's good that way. So that's about it. If you like my videos, hit the like button. If you could, please subscribe. It'll help me make more videos. I hope you enjoyed this one. This one's going to be a long one. This is like multi-piece over many days, so I got to edit this all together. So I guess that's about it. So hope you guys have a great rest of your day and keep wrenching.